Then slowly we progress. Hey, I am Chris from Airwindows, and we're going to do another little coding session today. Don't mind me, I'm going to fiddle with my gear a little bit. There we go. I don't know if anybody is here, but I'm kind of reevaluating stuff and figuring out what I can do with my whole setup here. And one of the things I can do is another coding stream. So we're going to see what we can do about that today. It's starting a little late than I used to, but I'm not going to be diving into the heavy, like, I'm all about the streaming that I used to be. In fact, I'm not actually streaming to Twitch right now. This is just purely YouTube. I feel that that's probably going to be a better match going forward, so I am simply going to double down on that. And with a bit of luck and a little care and attention, this will be a kind of thing that I can continue to do. So hi, anybody who's there. Actually, I've almost forgotten how that stuff works. Here, let me fire up something else. Where I can kind of keep a bit of an eye on what's going on. Like this. There. That's what I was looking to do. So, coding streams and rehacking things and thinking of stuff to do. I am currently working on my plans to travel a bit, and that's going to be interesting. And that's one of the things that I am looking into putting a little more effort into. As such, I'm kind of reevaluating everything that I do in light of that. You know, here's one of the things. Don't mind my handling noise there. I am very seriously thinking about reevaluating and changing around the stuff that I'm doing and or downsizing some of it. So what you're hearing me on today is not the Colaris. I'm going to record and test that and then probably sell it off. Here's how I'm going to do it. Hey, Resonant Peak. Yeah, well, things are, well, we're going to be doing a lot less in terms of running around doing stuff constantly. And I'll just see how things go. Like today, I'm going to stream until about 3, and we can probably do some things regarding, plugins and stuff. However, I'm also reevaluating everything in terms of what that I can do on the road. Here's something that I was going to show you. I mentioned how I'm trying a microphone change. And in fact, if I pull this out this way, and shuffle this over this way, I'd like to start using this mic instead. This is not the Colaris. This is still a Roswell audio mic, but it is the glorious and famous Mini K47. These are what I recorded the production drum samples and clips with. and it's kind of smaller and tidier and cozier, and I think I can have that be a remote / location kind of setup. So this is me thinking about some of those things, and I'm going to be very interested to check out how it sounds this time relative to the times that I'm using the Claris. Because, I mean, that's an amazing, very impressive microphone. That said, I don't think I necessarily need that grade of, but I do want to measure it, and like I said, I showed you these. Here's how you would measure the transient response of some kind of fancy microphone like that. Is you get a bunch of different things together. Here's one of them. For instance, this is the lavalier mic. It is a tiny, small diameter condenser with this power supply and so on. It's meant for being right up close to your mouth. And because it is so tiny, it's going to be more immune to loud noises, whereas larger diameter condensers, especially the Claris, which is designed to distort on some things, different microphones will respond to sounds in different ways. So remember when I did the samplers and things, and the way that I was doing the samplers was, here, hang on, let me fool with things even more. This is not going to be my most coherent video, but I should be able to handle it. I'm setting it up so that I can see chat better. I tested the samplers, and the new sampler I'm going to also test in this way by distorting into it and giving it sounds that stress it out. Well, here's a good way to stress out mics. Claves. All I got to do is this, and I'll be making an acoustic sound that will absolutely nuke all the mics around it, and it'll give me a good idea of what will happen when acoustic sound obliterates a mic in such a way that it's making an extremely high volume transient. And I can record a bunch of different microphone tracks with this same sound. Or if I hold it real tight, it's very loud. And for that reason, that will give me a good picture of what the different mics do with acoustic sounds. And then the rest of it is also talking, shouting, singing into the mic, and so on. Because the goal of that work is to be able to make a situation where you can get a basically functional, non-fancy, non-distorted mic. And remember, I've also got the ribbon mic. I've got the Beyer. So there is a lot of possible use. I'm going to need to come up with some good way of making low-frequency thumps too. Pop noises do kind of count as that, though. So the idea is to have something where you could have a, accessible mic, or say a lavalier, or here's one of my plans, is one of the MacBook Pro internal mics. Because the deal with those is I think you should be able to do serious work with those mics if you were buying one of those. And of course, I've always developed for Macs, and so I support those quite a lot. Thing is, I've seen people do this. For instance, Andrew Huang was recording into the built-in laptop microphone. But the thing is, nobody is using it quite correctly. I need to work out which laptops have a single mic and which laptops are trying to do some kind of fancy polar pattern with multiple microphone positions. And hopefully the ones that I'm currently looking at are the ones I have available, because I've got a reasonably newer one, and I've also got one of the first M1 laptops that came out, because that's how I supported the M1 chips. I'm going to need to put up those laptops in a position where you could use them effectively. Like the most recent one, or the first one that I got, possibly also the most recent one, the microphone is like under the 2 key or something, and it's very good for what it is. But the thing is, you must understand acoustical environments if you're going to be recording into that, because otherwise you're going to get some funky flanging and things going on. Because when you were if you were singing or talking into a laptop microphone and the microphone is like under the 2 key, it's like some kind of PZM, only not. Pressure zone microphones are microphones built into a flat surface. And if you have the screen near the flat surface, you will get a bounce, an acoustic bounce of your voice off of that nearby surface onto the 2 key. And the way to work around that is to be doing your singing from the side of the laptop, so all of the sound bouncing off of those flat surfaces bounces away. And that's how that would be done. So essentially, I need to first make sure all that works and that it's actually an omnidirectional microphone, which I believe I can do, and then do recordings from the correct angle to solve that acoustic problem, and then make plugins to take the resulting recording and reshape it until it has the same behavior as, say, the Colaris or the Bayer or whatever kind of, fancy pants or vocal mic you might want. And that's kind of the goal. And so I need to make some test files on the back of that, and I need to do it pretty quickly because I also need to send some of this stuff away. Like, for instance, the Mac stuff is pretty much, you can recycle it, and recent enough things you can sell back to Apple, and then they will go and sell it to somebody else, and you can get credit for the next big purchase of the next new M1, like Ultra or whatever. And you do this happy little thing of sending back stuff that still gets you a substantial amount of money for the Apple, like, buy it back kind of thing. And that means I have to get these laptops and things recorded. And yeah, well, I mean, it's ambitious, but if you think about, like, what I do, doesn't it kind of make sense? Like, isn't that the kind of thing that I could pretty much make happen? Like, it's doable. That is a doable thing. So there's a lot of ambitious in place, and this is part of the reason why things didn't really work out for me a couple of weeks back, and I crashed my car and busted a tire. Is there's a lot going on, and some of the things I'm tackling are very ambitious, but I think I'm the correct person to be doing some of those things. Hey, Glug Glug. And because I'm the correct person to be doing some of those things, I feel like it kind of falls to me to do it. And again, like I said, even on my travels, even when I am away from home and my stuff is in storage and so on, and it's like I'm living out of airports. I mean, who knows? I might end up being the traveling sound guy, the traveling Chris from Airwindows who comes to your town and helps you program plugins or something. All depends upon how things work out. But if I'm to do that, I got to do some of the background of getting these things sorted out first while I still have access to the stuff. Oh yeah, hey, version Visions from Gian. So this is Coding Stream. Here, watch. It can be even more on brand. I just set that up back when I was doing it in terms of Twitch streaming and so on. I decided that this would be a fun aesthetic for what the coding streams were about. I have also, as you might notice, addressed a fellow's complaint. There was a guy in KVR who was just like, "Why are you so close to the camera?" And so I was trying a different lens, which would be easier to travel with. And it should be okay. There are some drawbacks to this thing that I've switched to, but in other ways, it's pretty cool. Anywho, this is kind of catching you up to what I'm up to, and it's also kind of oh, and here, just let me do something for a moment. Don't mind me just fussing with a thing here. There. I just changed the restream so that I can still see who's there, but it's not distracting me with too many camera feeds and things. So what shall we do with basically an hour and a half? Because I'm going to go until 3, which is my habit for streaming days or hanging out and catching up with things days. If you have questions about stuff, that this is the time to ask. I'm in the middle of reshuffling a whole bunch of stuff, and I'm not going to be constantly on stream all the time. So it's like, this is going to be your time to ask. And other things that I do going forwards are probably going to be more in the way of editing videos. I also need to pick up some skills in like Final Cut or whatever. I'm kind of reimagining everything. But, hey, Flynn, well, thank you so much. I hope it's not too overwhelming. I'm trying not to be too overwhelming. So here's something that I've got that I prepared in advance. This is a list of things that I can do, and I have an idea of something that I can give a try at for like my hour and a half here. The list of things that I mean to give a try at is, there is a plugin called Mauve, which is like an EQ, except for that it's able to delay high frequency stuff to after when the low frequency stuff hits, which causes weird effects, but will also be able to make you take like a clicky electronic kick drum sound and cause the lows to hit up front rather than way behind the highs. And that is something that I'm going to give a try at. There's a number of ways I can try that. Here's a bunch of other ideas around, actually I'm not entirely sure what, oh yeah, there's some additional undersample options. For instance, I could be doing undersampled version of MV. That MV is based on all-pass filtering. I could do an undersampled version of Starchild. Starchild actually has a bug that I should look into. There is a plugin either called Glitch Nasty or Glitch Softer, which is probably going to be a useful start to when I do the sampler things, because the sampler things are going to have to involve like the pitch resampling that one does. And I'm not really quite sure what this, like I had the Emu, and this is the Ensoniq ASR10. That's an older machine. So I'm thinking the way that that works, it's going to have a somewhat more naive resampling algorithm. And I need to make a plugin like that. I need to make a plugin where it is a pitch shifter and it does the pitch shifting in such a way that you get the same result if you sampled at one rate and then slow it or speeded it to a different rate. So I'm going to need to do some tests on that. I need to do a variation on my point plugin, which is more accessible, and I need Baxandall 2, because Baxandall 2 has a couple of upgrades that I need to do with it. Somebody was looking for a C-strip gate, just the gate out of C-strip. Also, I don't think I've put out CVT, a cab CVT yet, and that's something that would be worth doing. I need to experiment with all passes that modulate. I need to get back into maybe either redo or do a newer version of high impact. I got a whole series of amp plugins, and that might be today because I'd like to have something that I can echo and do a bunch of variations on as far as just porting them. I had a series of plugins that have not seen Patreon or VST, like Big Amp, Fire Amp, Grind Amp, Lead Amp, Little Amp, Mid Amp. They're all basically just crude old distortion takes, but they also all have sort of that, there's something Airwindowsy about all of them, and there's no special reason you couldn't have them, but I'd like to put them out with ultrasonic filtering in all of them and just see what I need to do with regard to that. Like there'll be an ultrasonic filtering stage between everything. So I feel that's pretty approachable, and that'll be a number of posts. I have a series of stereo plugins, and I have a new isolator coming out. Then there is also an idea from Doubly. Somebody talked to me about this one, and the idea from Doubly is I've got from tape. In fact, I might even have it in this library here. Let's see. Yep, I have a from tape, and I have a from tape 3 for some reason. And I'll probably want to stick with the basic theme of that. But here's the deal. When you are talking about a classic recording, like of multi-track studio work, a person that wrote me, who I think was like close to my age, right? Somebody who actually knew what it was like back in the day. They said that they were in the studios of the time and were asking about what are those you should do the boxes, emulate those boxes that they had back in the studio, where all the studios, they ran the consoles and the tape machines and stuff, and everything always had to go through these boxes. Every little step of the way, everything had to go through these mysterious, and I was like, what are you talking about, mysterious boxes? He was talking about Dolby. He was talking about the early Dolby. And that, more than anything else, is the difference between early 70s and late 70s sound. Because you were still using the classic big consoles like the Neves and so on. They hadn't gone to really high processing consoles like SSLs, which gave you the 80s sound. But back in the day, when you started getting into sounds like one that comes to mind is Little Feats Don't Fail Me Now. Another one that comes to mind is Pink Floyd's The Wall. There's a lot of stuff in the mid and late 70s, and I think that even some of the classic, war horses of the day, Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon and Wish You Were Here, I think in some of those cases, we're talking, your 16 or 24 tracks, and the first instances of the magic noise reduction systems that they did not have in the 60s. And that is how that happened. Because when you're dealing with the earliest instances of Dolby, that's the concept of it. And we're not talking about doing a super detailed emulation of all the little circuit pieces, because the sound will die if you overcrunch that so much. But what's happening when you record to tape using a system like that is, especially with this early stuff, and this is why I say sometimes I think I can hear it. you are compressing high frequencies up to be consistently louder in a way that can be undone to some extent. There's a corresponding expansion that goes along. And then you're hitting tape, meaning that more of the sound is going to generate subtle harmonics like you get with from tape, which I think I have from tape out. But this is the tool that would use, because we're talking small tracks and a 16 or 24 tracks, so it's not huge fat bass boost out of these things. But the high frequencies will be accentuated into the clipping factor, which is something that I do have modeled in from tape, and then expanded back out again, causing the background noise to become less. And that's also going to cause the harmonics that are produced by the tape to be distributed over a wider range that is now expanded. Now, you don't need to exactly do, the exact Dolby sound to have this effect in play. So that's something I'm going to be getting into probably before very long. Like, I think I'll be diving into this pretty soon, I would say. Because the thing is, what I'd need to do is, for instance, take a compression algorithm such as, for instance, Curve. Something that I've got that will do a degree of compression and then apply that only to the high frequencies of the sound and kind of split it in that way. And then have the comparable, basically what I'd be doing is that, and then taking the output and, after distorting, decompressing it again, expanding it to some extent, so that you have you won't have any background noise, because you don't have to. That's not actually what happens with some of these tracks. For instance, I'm thinking of Feet Don't Fail Me Now. I'm thinking of the track Skin It Back off of Feet Don't Fail Me Now. I'm also thinking of Pink Floyd's The Wall. Some of these things are not really accurate to the sound. The way that the machines were set up when it was just custom made, people had this expansion, this compansion for the first time. And so when they had to tune it in on their tape machines, they decided they wanted infinite noise rejection. And so they set those old Dolby boxes up that had to be like tuned and set up, and they were finicky and they weren't as consistent as later incarnations of that stuff. And they were set to exaggerate the dynamics, and that's the sound. That is the sound. So there's going to be a plugin probably called From Doubly, because it's not actually going to be Dolby. It's the Spinal Tap joke of Doubly. You're like, oh, you can't do a rock track with Doubly. And with a bit of luck, that's going to do huge things as far as delivering certain tonalities and being able to get you like the vibe and tonal qualities of that stuff. Yeah, Doubly. Except for I think it would be Doubly, just because you'd imagine that Doubly would be pronounced that way. And that's also a common word, although From Doubly is not a word that anybody uses. And lastly, I have one more thing, which is Console 8. I'm not actually going to I have not been able to get a Mackie 8 bus. And I'm kind of warming to the idea of, if I do models, as I've promised to do, if I do models of existing consoles, unattainable consoles, from having the Patreon go mad, which it won't necessarily do, but if the world turns around and we all survive and people have more, I think a lot of people are really hurting these days, and so if you're hurting, take care of yourself first is always what I say, and people are, and I approve of this, but it does mean that I'm not meeting the goals of expanding the Patreon, so we'll just do what we can with what we got. And that means that Console 8 is not going to be the Mackie 8 bus. I haven't been able to get a hold of a Mackie 8 bus. That would probably end up becoming Mackie Console M or something like that. Console 8 is going to be the next Airwindows concept. And what I was thinking was, I can do a version, especially now that everything is running on doubles instead of long doubles, so I'm getting more efficiency there. I can do a version of console that is based on console 5. The version of console that used slew rate limiting. It does a form of slew processing that expands and contracts high frequencies in such a way where you got a really magic tone, but it also couldn't handle things like sawtooth waves. Well, I can combine that with filtering so that it'll have ultrasonic filtering. That is a given. But also it will have one of my extremely wide Airwindows band passes, which will help control the ultrasonic highs in conjunction with a dedicated ultrasonic filter. It'll be like twice as many poles of filtering, but they're different kinds of filtering, but it'll also cut off the DC. And I can make it controllable. I can make it like a tilt EQ. So it'll be the first version of console that acts like a channel strip. And what you'll be doing is manipulating a control that governs where the sort of lean of the channel that you're working with sits, whether it's leaning on just having extremely extended bass, or whether it's leaning on having more highs. And if you were working with a extreme sawtooth wave that generated the kind of energy that just freaks out console 5, you'd probably be leaning it towards the highs anyway, which would mean that it would be able to resist the massive DC push that the console 5 algorithm naturally does. And because there's a filter in it, I can also do two versions of the console 8 filtery thing. And one of them would be normal, and then there would be an active, which would be coefficient interpolation, so that you could automate it or do aggressive things with it to do stuff. And the normal one would be for when you were setting it and forgetting it. Like, don't move it, and then it will be the most efficient version of that biquad filter. But the other one would be, go ahead and play with these controls. You can automate them and do wild things with them in this sort of very broad-based, I don't know whether you'd call it wah filter. It wouldn't really be wah filter, but and it wouldn't be like resonant filter for effect, but you sure would be able to make it lean more towards the bass or more towards the high, and you'd be able to shift it completely seamlessly that way. These are the things I'm going to be doing going forward. And I'm not going to be doing them all on coding streams, but I will find a way to fit in the coding streams. As you see, they won't be constant, but I will still find ways of doing that. So here's library. That idea was not what I was going to do immediately. I thought what I could do today to sort of start things off is start with these amp things, the amp sims. And I've got 6 of those. Yeah, that would actually be sort of the opposite of what that would be, because you'd need to do that from individual tracks. Like if you were trying to do that, like console 8 is not going to be sounding like a wild, console 8 is going to sound retro as hell. It's going to sound retro as hell because it's band passes controlling the lows and stuff. But if you wanted to do the Smile style EQ curve, you could take sort of beefy, bassy sounds and things and sit them so that they were accentuating the extreme lows, and take stuff that was meant to sound really bright and sit them so that they were accentuating the extreme highs. And then your output, the final bus would be sort of a general balance on that. You could nudge it a little bit and you'd be manipulating the lows to highs balance subtly. And it seems like that would work really nicely. But it wouldn't be the plugins themselves doing the smile type EQ curve. They would be doing quite the opposite. And this is something that I advocate. I don't think that your individual tracks should ever be smiley curves. Your individual tracks should be sonority within the region of power, within the region that they live. And that's going to be different things for different kinds of instruments, like bright cymbals and things like that. You're going to want that to sit upright and not be accentuating the extreme lows. Dubby kick drums and bass effects and things, you're going to want those to be lows. You don't really want the highs in there. And so what I'm going to have is the bandpass that gives you that, which is another factor of biquad. I like using biquads for a lot of these things. They're nice little effects. And then also a ultrasonic filtering, because of course, if we're doing this, the bandpass is going to react differently at different sample rates. It is going to step very hard on stuff up near Nyquist at 44.1K, but if you were doing 96K, the lows are probably still going to be about the same, not necessarily exactly the same, but then the highs are going to try to extend out quite a lot farther. So it will need a dedicated ultrasonic filter to manage the, that control. And yeah, I mean, I use the loudness buttons on receivers and things too. Generally because I like having a lot of bass in there. Now, one of my chat folks in there is asking how the dry-wet control act. So basically, I can show you. And I will in a minute, but first let me open one of these plugins. I can open, oh hello, I've got one called, no, Bassamp is not one of these. Bassamp was something else. So we're going to open Big Amp. And we're going to generate a new project, which also is called Big Amp. In this situation, CocoaView gives me a stereo thing. By the way, last Sunday, I had to completely overhaul this retro laptop. Hey, True Magic. I had to completely overhaul this laptop because it stopped being able to connect to Get for source control. So I had to teach it to talk in a more modern protocol for like encryption and security and so on, which was a beast. That was terrible. I got through though. So this will show me one of the things that I'm looking to do, but it'll also answer the question. So here is how the dry, wet, and Airwindows stuff works. It is checking whether or not wet is literally 1. If wet is literally 1, I don't need to do this math operation, and so I'll skip it. But if it's not, then it is input sample times the amount that wet is, plus the dry sample, which is what I start out with. You can see that at the top of the file, times 1.0 minus wet. And the reason I don't have a variable that says dry there is because in modern processors, it's generally cheaper to do a quick little math operation than to keep another variable hanging around. So we try to do calculations sort of on the fly where needed. One thing I'm going to be doing most likely going forwards is I've started to dive back into the game engine Unity to the point where I have got it set up on my desktop machine and also the laptop that I'll be traveling with. And I'm looking forward to trying some of that stuff out, because thing is, as far as these things are concerned, I'm not a utility programmer, I'm not an OS programmer, I'm not a full stack programmer, I'm not a web page programmer, but I'm a designer. And what that means is I keep coming up with new plugins without running out of ideas and having to stop. But it also means, as far as working with something like Unity, and if anybody else is interested in learning, that kind of game coding stuff, we could do that together. You'll have to write me if you want that, because I'm not doing constant coding stuff anymore. But I do have the capacity to stream that as well. And I'm going to be diving into Unity and making stuff. I've got a number of ideas of things that I could try. And again, I am not a porting things to other programs or platforms programmer, or all of that stuff that is very arcane, but I'm a designer. It's not as much programmer as somebody's got to think of this stuff to actually do. Turns out I'm pretty good at that. And that applies completely to the world of Unity, to the world of thinking of stuff to do in that sort of game zone, where you're figuring out what you'd like, what would be fun, and, game ideas and such. And as it happens, I have enough familiarity with Unity that LinkedIn thinks I'm an expert in it. And that was pretty amusing, because that's not really true. But good enough reason to brush up on it, because I was able to make stuff happen there before. But having explained how the dry wet works, here is our next thing. Yeah, this thought is the father to deed. Absolutely. We would like to port this. Its ID is big A. So we'll go from there. I'm actually very glad that I was able to get this to actually work with Git again. Because, it looks like I'm having one of my making a big stack of IIR filters. So apparently there's a bunch of stuff going on here. And we'll make it happen and let you have one. I don't even remember what this sounds like. I guess we'll find out pretty soon. Here's our new one. And we'll start by just building it and making it work in the new context. We've got 3 controls, but we're going to have 4 controls because we're also going to include a dry wet. All of these reissues of these plugins from before are going to include the dry wet because people just like it so much. So that's the next stage. You can kind of see what I'm doing here. I will let you see more easily soon. And the dry wet will be a setting of 1 because we want it to be fully cranked, as in all wet. And then here is that plus our dry wet. And we're going to be doing this with all of these. Not necessarily all on stream, but they're all going to have, there's a consistency that I like to have with these things, which is sometimes helpful. Like when people are trying to port my stuff to other situations, it can be helpful to have it working in a very consistent way. Like it's worth going to the effort of methodically making it consistent in that way. And the next thing is we need to, these are all 0 to 1 controls, which is what they're supposed to be. This is how we instantiate that stuff. But we need to copy this bit over too. And we can change bits of this. I don't think I need just an example here. We're not going to be changing it wholesale, but we are going to be changing some things. For instance, we can define this in here. We don't need to use register. Only really old computers and old compilers got any benefit from doing that, so that is archaic. We might or might not need to be defining these things here. Some of them might be better off defined elsewhere, but I think all of these are stuff that's been saved up. That's how that's meant to work. So, lastly, we're going to take some of this stuff and I also see that this is not doing any, oh no, we are doing sample rate. So we're probably going to want to refactor some of this to make it be more consistent with current ways of doing things. It's a little too old. So EQ is get parameter kparam2 divided by sample rate and times 22050. So the end result of that, I'm going to set this apart. In fact, we're going to rearrange some of these things right now. This can move here. And then these things, I'm going to be refactoring, but I don't necessarily have to do that right now. But it is, and some of this can just as well be made into a written down number in the code. I don't actually need to have a variable for that. In fact, it's bad if I do, and I should not. Also, these things should not be defined up here. But this is just stuff that I've learned over the years and that I'll be incorporating. And the code of this plugin is not going to be that huge. It'll be maybe a little bit huge, but we've definitely got some weirdness in here. So what I'm going to do for starters is just kind of take this, grab all of it, and dear God, look at all of that. And run with that. My goodness. Alrighty then. So we'll be refactoring that, and I will accept as the end of today getting a version of it that still runs and has been somewhat refactored so it doesn't have the sheer degree of weirdness that this has. But we're going to start by replacing this stuff, and we're going to still have the dry wet in there. So I'll make a little space. I do not know whether I'm even defining input sample anywhere in here, but we've got one here. I haven't updated that yet. And this should still work, although I can delete that now because we're instantiating it right here. And then we can do this. See, we don't need that up there. It's good to be able to define stuff where you're using it, because that shows you where the variables belong. That is something that I did not know at first, and I learned over the course of doing this kind of thing. You know, we're not going to do that with last sample because that needs to be stored, but we are going to do it with bridge rectifier. And we're sort of VSTizing it going forward. Here's another. Here's something I think we can do. edit all in scope. 1.57079.633. This is a variation on pi, so that's where we're getting that. And now that we've done that, we don't need this declaration anymore because we made it kind of go away. Probably with this stuff we want things being defined that are based on input controls coming in, whereas the stuff that's just being defined up here, on the whole, we probably don't need to define it up here. And this diagonal thing in here may or may not be something better handled by undersampling, but it's probably okay. There's definitely a lot going on here. I'm going to want to listen to what this sounds like on like some tracks and things. And it's not going to sound like there's a cabinet in there, but it's going to sound like something. We will see. So let's continue with this. Randy is a random source, obviously. And it's being defined first down here. We're also going to want to pull up a recent plugin, like for instance this one, that has random values like this. Because we don't use rand anymore. We use FPD. We also don't do not, because that doesn't translate into VST world. We use exclamation point, which means logical not. And that's how we do a Boolean that flips back and forth. So let's sort of go from here, and rather than doing dest p and directly feeding the result of this, we'll have input sample become that. We don't need to update these twice, but we do need to do the flip. Now this should still work. So now we have handled Randy here. We need to go and also find result B and offset. None of those are actually going to need to well, yeah, let's just go and find it. Result B, result B. Where's result B? Actually, there's a way that I can check that. Now, what else is highlighted? And it's going to be right in the beginning here. If it's there at all. Oh, I see. So the reason that's being defined up there is that it's being declared. It could be like double equals result B, double result B equals here. It's going to be one or the other of these things. But since it's being used for the first time there, then we can't declare it inside the curly brackets, because then it'll cease to exist outside the curly brackets. And that is why we have it in that way. And we're taking it and using it elsewhere. So that is probably we can instantiate it to like 0 or something. There, that should be fine. I bet offset is declared somewhere where I can get at it though. Let's find out. Oh, sure is. Right up front. First time we see it, this is where it could be defined. And in fact, we can, rather than having that stuck up there, We can go find where it's being used. I do have to correctly find where it's being used, though. Let's see, is it here? There's a whole bunch of stuff going on in here, I'll tell you that. It'll be interesting to hear what this sounds like. It's been a long time since I've seen this one. There is result B being used for something. Here it is being instantiated. And we can fuss with the definition here. We don't need these curly brackets because it is a single statement, and sometimes I like having the if statements just hit the just the one statement immediately after the if it's one of these styles. So let's kind of go through and address that. You know what? I don't actually need overall scale in this context because it is actually handling it a different way. So we'll keep this the way that it was because it does try to handle sample rate, and it is a reference to an older plugin that we're going to try to bring out sounding the way that it did. Therefore, we can have it be doing that. So these if statements are fine. All of this stuff is really weird, but that's okay. And let's see now. And here's, I took away that, and I would like to compress this a little bit, just because that suits me, that having these kind of statements, the else can be surrounded by curly brackets, and I just kind of like it that way. So we sure have a lot of IR samples in here. Let's end up hearing what this sounds like. Big amp indeed. We'll find out. We'll find out whether it's really a big amp or not. There's our random factor. Interestingly, some of this doesn't need to, we don't actually have to use this. We can sign into negative values just as easily as positive values, so we don't actually need to do this. I would say, in fact, that I'm going to change it. So the way this will work is to just go directly to result and not worry about this using bridge rectifier to make it positive or negative. How many other places can I find that happening? Because that's clearly not something I need to do, and I can tighten up the behavior of the thing a little bit that way. Let's go look for bridge rectifier again and see whether it's weird or simple. Because if it's not too weird, we can handle it. So this one, we do have to do it this way because it's clamped. It's going to be limited to 3.14. It's going to be limited to pi. So skew will go back to 0. So we do, in fact, have to sort that one out where it's clamped. And otherwise, we would need to, well, no, actually, hang on. Okay, yeah, that is happening before we hit the sign factor, so that will in fact work, so that's fine. and it's absolute value, so it can't be negative. We could do it with just two if statements and suppress it that way. We'd have two if statements anyway, so there's no special reason why we can't have that be the way it is. Might as well leave it there. There's some more clamping here. There are ways to do this with math statements as well, which is fine. There's no special reason I'm not. I just, often if it's something like this is a logical question, is it clamped to this point, I'm happy just using if statements. It'll work out to be about the same, I think. If anybody knows, like, oh, I need to do math because the math will be way faster than an if statement, then let me know. Here is another clamped statement, or a weird combination of things. We'll leave that. Here's another weird combination of things. We'll leave that too. We'll find out what it sounds like pretty soon. And here we are with yet another weird combination of things. Base cut, slow passes, things like that. This should probably work now. I think we're done with all these IIR filters. There's a whole bunch of lettered IIR filters, which are the simplest form of filter. And those can sound very nice. It's like a very low, compared to something like a biquad, these kinds of IIR filters are much more primitive. In fact, I might end up using this style on the from doubly thing I'm thinking about with regard to doing the high passes for that. I might just choose to do that. It'll be a matter of getting that set up and then sort of tuning the decode of it until it gets back to basically what you had. But of course it'll be somewhat changed, because that's the whole point, is it also needs to be somewhat changed. Might even be passing raw bass through, or possibly not. In the actual Dolby and tape machine situation, there is no passing raw bass through. Indeed. Okay, so first things first, let's get this sorted. That seems fine. The random seems fine. That's apparently something that we're doing. I think that's just adding a random fuzz on the output. That is apparently what Big Amp did, so we're going to do that. And let's put this on its own line, because it's sort of after everything, and it's important in its own right. And this is probably not going to build the first time. Nope, it needs to try to build once. This old version of the program does tend to kind of do that to me. And I think I have closed, or not. Oh, and we've got something here. Oh, we didn't delete that yet. So this is the new version, and we don't have these parameters, so I forgot to take those away. And this stuff up here is just because it hasn't compiled yet. So the next time it compiles, it'll be fine with those. There we are. Now let's build that again. Up. Here's where we went wrong. Oop. And just for jollies, let's make these float 64s go away. They will be double in the VST, so I can just save myself a little time doing this. I'm not honestly sure what the difference is supposed to be in core audio. If we have stuff like this coming in, I will leave it as what the compiler expects, but for the stuff that I build myself, I'm inclined to just call these double precisions and run with those. One trick with these is that it might sometimes be useful to put in denormalization things, just because otherwise they will trail down to silence eventually, and that will have the program trying to do denormalized numbers on them. We don't like that, so it might be relevant to attend to that issue. I've got code in recent stuff that handles that. And now it should be fine, which means after I close this reference one, and let's also close everything else, here's the one we were looking at, and here's its new build. Now I should have this patched through into the speakers, and we'll see how this sounds relative to what the Colares was able to do with background stuff. Hey Mel. Nebula self-sample rate conversions. I don't know anything about that, I'm afraid. Hey Nick, it's good to see you. I'm not going to be sticking around for much longer myself, so don't worry about it. Let's go back to one of our old favorites, Alien Kittens, and distort it with this new thing. And see whether that actually works at all. Let's find out. Oh yeah, that's distorted. So apparently our tone control is just darkening things like mad. Oh, okay, it's a tilt control. Does have a sound to it. Volume works. I think what we're going to do is we're going to add a ultrasonic filter here and call it a day. And then if we crank it, oh yeah. So, there's a thing. So next thing in store is let's dive into this and see where we would put the filtering. And we don't actually have to... we can start working with result here and just sort of run from that. Technically, we could probably also if we're doing this, why not just rename this to input sample? Let's see if we broke anything through doing that, because you don't need that anymore. And all the stuff inside is now recalibrated by that. So we will find out real quickly whether it still works or whether it stopped working. I'm going to call that acceptable. Let's go from there. How many stages of filtering should we have? Let's go and look in this and then see which bits have filtering and where the gain staging is. I'm actually not entirely sure. There's every time we hit input sample times equals input level, because we have multiple stages in here. Look, there's yeah. That doesn't change the fact that skew is something. But everywhere it says input sample times equals input level is probably a place. Well, we've got comments, but this is a really old, weird plugin, so I'm not that worried about teaching people how to think in this way, because I will not be thinking in this way either. So let's see. Let's find every single place it says input sample times equals input level, and before we hit that, we'll throw in a biquad ultrasonic filter, like from Edge or something. We'll use that. That's not going to be a thing. I can use as many of those as I want because it's just biquad ultrasonic filters. If it exactly matches the number of filters in something like Edge, excuse me, I can kind of just grab it out of that and go with it. It'll be fun if it turns out to be a thing where so we filter before input sample times equals input level. So there's one place to put it. It will be before actually doing this other stuff. Actually, no, one more. Let's make a point of doing it before we measure skew. Excuse me, my oh, is the stream showing poorly? Comments are this very dark gray. Maybe I can fool with that. Let's see whether I can make that be different. That's apparently fine. It could be smaller letters, but that'd just make it even worse. Alrighty. Let's make that a little grayer. See how I can make it be a different shade? We'll make it be a different shade. There we go. So hopefully that'll be a little bit more visible. Let's see, input sample times equals input level. You know what? We can also rearrange this a little. Those are individuals, so we can have them be in that order. There's another. Here's another. These are acting like the stages of amplification. Like each of these are individual little tubes doing their thing. And then there's another. We're going to count these up and see how many of the ultrasonic filters we're going to need. And then one at the very end. And we're going to see whether we can just grab it straight from like Edge or something. Because it's the sort of thing that one could probably do. And that's fine. And then we could put one towards the end here. So big spaces 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Alrighty. Oh, the song in the Silhouette video is the stuff that I've been working towards as far as, rather than just doing random jams, tracking things. Because my idea was I'd like to sort of dive into that kind of stuff, use my ability to compose and work with like the chord slide rule and so on, and make actual music that I could put together an album and throw it on Bandcamp and whatever. You'd still be able to hear it in like the videos and such, but I'd like to get some of that stuff together and make a record. And you'd only hear the results of that once I finally finish doing a whole set of tracks that way. But, you know, people ask like, oh, are you going to put out a record based on these live jams? And they're just not coherent enough. Plus, I'm also putting the live jams out. Well, I always used to put the live jams out just on SoundCloud, and you could download it. Oh, are you getting hum? I'm hearing something humming in the room. I'm not quite sure what it is. It might be in my basement. It might be the heater. I guess I'll check later and find out. Like, also, if I touch it, does it make it hum? See, is that making a buzz? If so, then that's interesting, and I'll have to look into that. But I guess we'll see. Anywho, I'll check into that later. If it turns out I can't use this microphone, then I'll just fall back on the one that I have that works. Everything is experiments these days. So let's see, 6. I believe that Edge is 7, and I believe that I also have other stuff that is like 5. So let's open up some of these other things, and in our last half hour, we'll try to throw the ultrasonic filtering in and see what it does. Airwindows, plugins, Mac AU. Let's see what kinds of options we have here in recent stuff. Because we can just grab some of these things directly. Here's Edge. Edge had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now, the reason I'm deciding to do it in the way that I am is because these are calculated out to have exactly the right number of filters. I'm listening for the hum now. You've distracted me and caused me to listen to hum. Let's also open up, what was it, Dirt. does dirt have a comparable number of filters, or perhaps maybe a little less? Does it have 7, or does it only have like 5? It also has 7. So since let's just use 6 of the 7 and leave out the final one. It will be a slight boost to the edge, a slight boost to the behavior. So in order to do that, we need to copy stuff out of here and kind of use it. I'll save that. Use it as is. So we want this enum, and we want A through F. That was 6 that I was using, yes? Let's count them again. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we will use 6 rather than 7 and allow it to just brighten things very slightly, but not all that much, because the way this is going to work, if I leave the last one out, not going to be a huge difference. We start getting into diminishing returns around about like fix F or whatever. They add up to perfect flatness, but the way that it works, you don't really get it quite that way. And here we are. So it's an interesting combination of everything. We've got sort of it all going on. But because of this sort of modular design, we should be able to get this rather cleanly and not take forever doing it. We don't need IR sample because we've got loads of those already. And we're not doing the final fixed by quad, so we leave that out. And then now, back to this, because I think it was open, but it was off screen. You know, that's the sort of thing that I could, let me get more tracks together, maybe we can do it. Or if somebody hires me to mix their album, I could be doing that on stream if you wanted. I have mixed albums before. For the band Worsiki is what I've been doing that work for, and I've been pretty happy with how it works. And I go at $40 an hour, which is pretty reasonable. And yeah, that is something that I absolutely could do. Let's see, did I copy this over? Yes, I did. So here is where we are going to grab this and then immediately start using it. We're going to put that at the end of this part, paste it right in, and leave the last one off. And if we do that, and then delete this last, actually, no, I could delete one of the ones in the middle, and then it would probably be, let's delete literally the middle one, the 0.707. Yeah, we'll make it be still essentially flat. Just not perfectly. Actually, no, let's have it lift just a tiny bit, but let's leave this one on the very end. Meaning that now that says D, E, and F. There we go. Oh, no, I like working with people. It just hasn't really been as much of a thing. And I haven't got everything I need from here. We need cutoff. Cutoff is in here somewhere. Where did we get cutoff? Because that is significant. All right. And cutoff is relative to how this works. So we're going to grab it from here, but then probably leave it as a fixed amount. And we've got to have some form in there. So we need it to be a frequency. Right now, get So we can set it to brighten red up, or I'm just figuring out how this is going to work, because I'm not going to want to turn it right down and then have it act exactly like Edge does. So what I'm thinking is let's do something else. Let's see how it goes to 25K. We'll make it go to 20K and add the additional 5K if we brighten it up. So this is going to, or, hang on. We'll start at 15K at the absolute dullest, and then as we crank it, we go increasingly towards 25K. That's probably about right. Let's do that. And with that, we have these instantiated correctly. Now we need to copy the functional parts of it, where we have it inside Edge here. And we're going to move these windows so I can kind of see what I'm doing a little bit. And we are, in fact, working with input sample. See, it says input sample times equals input level, so we are meant to be working with input sample. And we're defining out sample here, so that's fine. And this is just the biquads that we use. So firstly, one. First one lives here. Next, second one. Don't need to redefine out sample. Third one. Don't need to define out sample again. Let's make it sit the right place right from the word go. Little space between those things. Fourth one, fix D. People program these things in classes and stuff. I like just having it be modular so that like you are the compiler, you are the one seeing like this is a chunk of stuff in here, and I'm just taking pieces of it that are marked with a little label at the end and putting it in the places it needs to be. I like it that way because I find it a little more approachable, and I can see how much is in the code when I'm using it. Then, let's see. There was D, here was E, and I have got F, and F is going to be all the way down here. And that would be it, and sure enough, G is the one we left out. So we don't need to be looking at Edge anymore. But now we see if this will still compile. Signs point to yes. Let's see whether we added the ultrasonic filtering and made it work. If we did, I'm going to call it a day. I'm going to say, yay, we finished doing this, and I'll be done for the day. Other than answering a couple of questions before testing this. Yep, syntax sugar as far as the compiler is concerned. People consider syntax sugar to be having as few words on the page as possible. I like to have stuff be explicit quite often. So what's the Airwindows plugin that comes closest to what a power amp does? I couldn't tell you. It would depend upon what power amp you meant, really. I mean, I have single-ended triode, which is capable of doing things that a single-ended power amp might do. Fair enough, Blue Baggins. If I recorded jam sessions using separate channels, that would be something I could do. Let's see what we made. So remember what it sounded like last. Here is what it sounds like now, if it worked. Huh, interesting. We got a little hiss in there. Okay, that's interesting. If nothing else, it's interesting. And before I completely leave this, let's open up an effect stack that I used with the cabs. And instead of simply using edge or dirt or whatever, let's add this new thing. And see what we get. So here's what we had it left as. There's edge, and here's the new one. A lot of output, so we'll take the let's call it, let's renormalize the naming of this to match what edge does. I'm going to just take a quick moment and do that. That way it'll be consistent for people who are fooling with these things. So it's gain and output, I believe. There, next time I compile it, it will be saying that. And we will compile it, but I'm not worried about testing that out just yet. I think we're fine. But there's edge. Don't I have guitar sounds in here somewhere? Let's go and find my guitar sounds. I know I have guitar sounds in there somewhere. Here we go. So there's edge. So Les Paul guitar. That's the amount of gain we have on it. Here's what Big Amp gives us. And if I fool with the controls on this big amp, drive is about as high as it'll get. And that's okay. Okay, it's definitely an option. Yeah, I still don't have actual impulses to do a really proper job of what people normally do with this stuff. Cabs isn't really that. Cabs is... It is giving me lows, I'll tell you that. Yeah, we got chunkiness going on. Yeah, it's a distinct thing. And as you crank it, we get into this zone. I can't say as we get a lot of... Well, I've got a Strat sound in here. Go to large combo. There's more of a clean tone. Alrighty. So you'll have that. I'm not sure if it's going to be like immediately next Sunday, but we're going to be putting some of these together. I'll be doing the same with these other things that I've got, following the same basic technique. And we'll be putting out a whole bunch of the old Airwindows amp simulator attempts with whatever weird quirks they might have, including the weird quirks of this one. And it'll be a combination of the sounds that I had back in the day with the sounds that they get with the ultrasonic filtering and ability to run at 96K properly. It's going to be an interesting combination of new and old that way. And I gotta say, I'm kind of looking forward to it. So yeah, we will call that a success. And I'm going to call that a live stream. So until next time, I'll talk to you folks later. Yeah, it's close enough to 3. I will bid you a good day, and I'll see you again probably next Monday. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.